Hi, my name is Hussein. I am the CEO of Super.com, and I am joined by Theresia Gouw from Acrew. Theresia, nice to have you.
Hey, Hussein, thanks for having me.
Awesome. So you are definitely one of the more accomplished and interesting investors in Silicon Valley. So wanted to get some of your time to talk about a whole bunch of stuff. Let's talk about the market. Let's talk about AI. Let's talk about super apps, about diversity. But first, why don't you introduce yourself?
Okay. Hi, well, I'm Theresia Gouw. I've been on the dark side, as I know the entrepreneurs call it, investing for over 20 years now. Before that, along as my son, who is a Wars fan, would say, a long, long time ago in a galaxy far away, I was in your shoes, Hussein. I was an entrepreneur at a venture-backed startup, raising money before I joined the dark side. So that's a little bit about me. And we're super excited and proud to be investors in Super.
Awesome. So let's talk about that maybe, and maybe first at a high level, your investment philosophy, what type of companies you look for, and I'm sure a lot of people are wondering what's going on in the market these days, and are you starting to see things turn around?
So maybe I'll start with the market. I'm sure it's top of mind for many people. So I am starting to see signs of at least stabilization, if not improvement, in the private markets of raising capital for private, tech companies. I would say that I think that the last half of last year and the first quarter or so of this year was probably, as things were still, interestingly, as the public markets have rebounded a little bit this year, I think that has helped some. But honestly, I think probably the lowest point for the private capital markets was in March during the failure of Silicon Valley Bank, which really set a ripple effect. I think things now have stabilized both with the banks, but also in the venture funding market. So what I'm starting to see is, as you mentioned, so some sectors which are very, very hot, like AI, those companies are still raising. And it's almost as if 2022 didn't happen. um, and I'm starting to see other companies like Super and others, right, that are, they've continued to grow and succeed in this much more challenging macroeconomic market, and they are able to raise capital. It is taking longer than it did before. And the valuations, are not completely divorced from the public market valuations. So they're certainly less than what they were in 2020 and 2021. But I think that they found a pretty reasonable place for companies that are doing well. Like when I say reasonable, if you took more like a 7 to 10 year view by sector, like, including the bubble years, the pricing bubble years and the before years, we're kind of looking at multiples that look, to an old person like me, more reasonable over a longer period of time, whether that's for, consumer facing apps like Super, or for security and data infrastructure X AI, which is still on its own high multiple, as well as in fintech, which are the three core thesis areas for Acrew. And maybe that like leads into like the investment philosophy. So I've always had a very kind of thesis driven investment philosophy, dating back to my 15 years at Excel before starting Acrew. And so for our firm, as I mentioned, we do um, consumer internet, or what we call community activated, which is where we put Super. We also do quite a bit of data and security infrastructure investing, which is the other place where I spend a lot of my time in these first two sectors. And then the third sector, which is another big one for us, is fintech, with companies like Chime and Divvy and others that have been in our portfolio. And I think that has really proven to be helpful to me, both like early in my career when I started it, because it allows you as an investor to really, now we're never going to be as deep as the entrepreneur as you will be in any particular market or business model or technology trend, but it allows us to come with a little bit more informed point of view. And it helps us when we think about like, well, why do we pick a specific company to invest in? I think if you talk to most investors, hopefully this is generally true, because I've been on enough of these panels. People talk about, oh, there's like 3 general things that you look for in a company, right? Like, and the question is like, what's your weighting of these 3 things? You look at sort of, what's the market opportunity? What's the market that they're going after? How big is it? How fast is it growing? So market. Then you look at the team, and then you look at the technology / competitive differentiation, right? Those are the 3 main buckets. And for me and for Acrew, by starting with this thesis focus, we feel like, we already come to it both a little bit more knowledgeable, but we kind of pre-vetted, like, these are the specific markets. And it's not just as broad as I'm saying, like it was very specific, right? Like, we had a view that companies in the community activated space that had that were focused on high repeat usage transactions with their consumers, and the technology piece. And if they were actually using, back then it was like more like machine learning, not full AI, as a way to accelerate their ability to find those matches. And so when we saw Super, hopefully this was evident on your side as well, it was evident to us, like, okay, so we come to the table already, like, we like this market, we know that. Now we're just looking to back the best teams that are going after this. And clearly you and your co-founders, kind of, fit that. So it allowed us to make both a more informed and what we would say higher conviction decision, because we had done some of that work. Now, there are other people who will say, well, it's all about the technology. And so we're saying they're all 3 important, but for us, by being thesis focused, we can come a little bit with our homework done on the market and really spend most of our time looking at, hey, is this the team? Because the team is really, in our view, and maybe it is clear in our sort of cheeky double entendre name, like Acrew, right? Like, we think that it's all about the team, that is kind of where, because they're the ones who are going to create the technology and the differentiation, right? So those are really kind of my personal tenets, which fortunately I found a group of awesome co-founders at Acrew, and like Lauren and Vishal and Sukhinder and others. Like, that's really kind of what we're about in terms of our investing thesis.
Awesome. Thank you. That was really helpful. Maybe from there, I'll just talk a bit about super.com and sort of how the company has evolved, and even some of the team, because you mentioned that's so important. And then I want to go a little bit deeper into AI. So I mean, first of all, our company now, we're 200 plus people, myself and my co-founder Henry, who came from Google, but we've really spent the last sort of, I would say, 2 years building up the team, right? So we have someone who runs our travel vertical, who was formerly the president of Hotwire. We have a CMO who comes with a ton of great experience, a CFO who comes with a ton of great experience, and like, we just continue to build out the team in that way. Someone on the fintech side who comes with 20 plus years experience, and I think that is really important, and that really evolves my role as a CEO, because as we bring on more and more of these like great people on the team, it allows us to focus on different things, have like great people run certain parts of the business, and allows us to sort of elevate what everyone does. So that's been really fun, and appreciate you sort of recognizing the team that we had and the team that we continue to build. I want to talk a bit about AI, and you talked about investing in AI. First of all, has there been like an overinvestment in AI? I know there was like a huge amount of money going into AI, I would say, in the last couple of quarters. Do you see that slowing down in Q4 and going into Q1? And then maybe let's talk specifically about AI in chat, because that's something that's very relevant for us.
Yeah, absolutely. So, starting with your point about, has there been an overinvestment or what are we seeing? So we are starting to see a little bit of a moderation. I was going to say slowdown. It's not a slowdown, a moderation from the peak amounts maybe that we saw earlier this year in AI. So it's still getting funded. Those are still the companies that are probably achieving the highest, valuation multiples in the private markets and in the public markets too. We can see it with some of the recent earnings announcements from NVIDIA and others. I think they're, like with other sectors before, it that have gotten very hot. I do think that there probably are some very lofty valuations that were granted companies ahead of their progress. Now, some of those companies will grow into those valuations and some won't. That's always the case. So I think it's probably been more that than quote unquote overinvestment. I do think what it means is it will be more competitive for every company in whatever their specific slice of AI is. Because when there's more capital flowing, there's more competition, makes it harder to hire, all of those things. But the best companies still always thrive in those environments. You know, for us, and I want to talk about it because then I want to throw it back to you because it very much leads into, as I foreshadowed, like one of the really interesting things about Super's technology that kind of caught our attention at the time when we made the investment was, you know, we've been investing in machine learning, which is kind of, you know, a subset, a precursor, right, of like what we know today as like the full foundational models, LLM, and the broader set of AI capabilities that exist today. Like our very first investment 10 years ago now was in a company, and ties back to the thesis work, right? That was applying machine learning. It wasn't AI, but machine learning, algorithmic data and pattern matching to security data events, right? So I've been investing in security companies since 2000. Yes, I was very young then in 2000, and then saw that. So this has been an ongoing, so we go back 10 years. So we've been investing in machine learning companies all along the way since the earliest days of our startup firm. And then, you know, we did look at quite a few chat-based interfaces on like, you know, could it disrupt, as in Super's case, travel and commerce, fintech, other areas that we've looked at that are a little bit more user facing. So both the community space and some of the consumer facing fintech spaces. You know, I think what we saw over time, and then it leads right into our investment in you. And I'd love to hear if like your take on where, not just where it was when we invested, but where it's going. That's what I really want. I know, but I think to the extent that you're open to sharing with the broader public, I think that's super interesting. So, you know, shortly before we invested in you, we'd started to see like a change both in the ability to actually use machine learning and maybe more primitive early days of certain AI models in order to do some things which were more unsupervised learning. So a little bit more with less human in the loop, right? And so that's why, and I still remember this, when I saw both obviously the transaction growth, your consumer satisfaction, the growth during a very hard time for most businesses, you know, coming out of COVID, and you guys were beating all of those things. But the one thing that really stood out at me was like 90% of those transactions were closing with no human people from your company needing to be part of it, which meant that not only was the chat interface working for consumers that they felt comfortable not speaking to human, but whatever ML or AI magic you had in the background was doing a really good job of figuring out how to find the right offer to the right consumer. So that was like really eye-opening to us. And we were excited about that. And that was even before we, you know, could have foreseen like the massive improvements in some of the underlying models, particularly some of the language-oriented models, which I think would be most helpful and relevant to Super's business. So that was one of the things that kind of tied us into that. You know, and since that time, we've invested a lot in sort of, as we started to see AI being adopted more by enterprises, you know, a little bit more in sort of like the tooling layer above that, because we do a lot of security and monitoring for enterprise AI models in the form of companies like Protect AI and Arthur AI, and also a little bit more kind of like at that level. We haven't seen as many. We have maybe one other company that called Writer, which uses their own specific, smaller but very specific type of LLM to help marketers be consistent in their brand voice of how they create ads and copy. That's had some success. And then you guys, of course, in the travel and commerce space. So you guys are actually at the forefront from what we've seen at the top layers, right? Like, and then we think, the infrastructure layers, right? Like the actual foundation, because of the scale and the like, everybody's reading about. So Google and Microsoft, they're all like fighting it out. But I think there's a ton of opportunity both in the layer above that to make those foundational models translatable to everybody from big enterprises in fintech and in like insurance and banking who might want to use it, to also, you guys are really, to me, like one of the early breakouts at the application layer, really kind of interfacing with consumers. So hopefully that was a generally correct recollection where you were when we met. And I'd love to hear more about like all the places that you've taken that so far.
Sure, yeah. So that's a perfect lead into how sort of a company has evolved. So I'll kind of tell you the story and the evolution for your benefit and for other people who decide to listen in on this. I'll tell you a bit about the evolution of super.com as the business grew. And I'm gonna keep hinting back at the sort of AI piece and the chat piece. So when the company started, and this was 6 or 7 years ago, it was just about hotels, and it was just about booking hotels over chat. So you could come in as a customer, and that time we were even called something different. We were called Snap Travel, and you could come in and you could chat over SMS, Messenger, and WhatsApp, and you could say, "Hey, I need to book a hotel room in New York," and we'd get you some great hotel deals. Now that chat module, the NLP that we use, the AI that we built, was like pretty good, but it was still easy to break, right? It just wasn't a great built on this great general purpose AI that now exists today, right? So what would happen is people would use it, but very often it would just kind of break because they would just like ask a question that we didn't understand, that we didn't have a great way to sort of parse, and it would be a problem. But then two, when we were allowing customers to book hotels, unfortunately, as good as, even if your chat was almost perfect, it still wasn't really a great interface to book, because like if you take a step back and you think of it as a consumer, if you want to book a hotel, you want to see everything. You want the visual interface. You want to see all the images. You want to see all your room options. You want to see the cancellation policy. You want to see like everything in between, so you can pick your exact room and additions and type in your credit card and do all of that. So chat wasn't really a great interface for searching and booking. And even now, with AI being as good as it is, it's still not a great interface for searching and booking. But because AI has come so far, what it is good for is it can shortcut you into where you want to get to. So you can say, "Hey, do you have any recommendations for hotels over here based on this, that, and this is what I have to do, and here's where my conference is," and we can like deep link you into the right spot in the UI. It's very good for customer service and for answering questions. I have a booking coming up in 3 days. Can you tell me if there's a pool? And can you tell me if I can cancel and what the cancellation fee is? And that's great. So it's really good at doing things like that. But the actual searching and booking process still needs that UI to be able to get it done. So that's kind of been the evolution here. And we're using AI now in the customer service centers to try and get answers to customers faster, so it doesn't need to go to an agent, and sort of throughout the customer service and support layer. Now, where it's starting to get interesting is how we're using AI on the user interface layer. So that kind of takes us into the topic of super apps and how the business has evolved. So when we started the company, it was just about getting hotel deals. And we spent a lot of time over the past 2-3 years talking to our customers, and we realized our customers don't just want to save, they need to save. We realized our customers didn't just need to save on hotels, they had to save across everything they bought. At one point, we saw that 70% of our customers were paying with a debit card because they didn't have access to a credit card. And they were looking for ways to save money and earn money. So we changed the entire company. We rebranded the company to Super. We bought the URL super.com. We now actually refer to ourselves as super.com as the company. And we added all these things. So we added, hotels continues to be a big business. We added a pay card, which essentially lets you build your credit score and earn cash back with your everyday spend anywhere MasterCard's accepted. We had the ability to save money on gas. We had the ability to make money by filling out surveys. And we continue to add these other savings and earnings use cases. Now, what's happened is we've evolved into this super app where customers can come to save and earn. But super apps can get quite complicated because there's so many things that you can do that it becomes very difficult to present the right offer to the right person at the right time. And that's where we're starting to now see AI kick in. So we're starting to work on using some AI models where we can send the right email and modify the UI and send the right notification, the right message. So we know what a customer may be looking for, and we know what's more likely for them to convert on. Because you could want to save on gas, and you could want to earn by filling out surveys, and you could want to save on hotels, and you could want to sign up for the pay card, you could want to sign up for the Super Plus membership, but we simply don't have like the enough pixels to be able to show all of that effectively in the right way. So we use AI to start to modify the UI to get the right offer in front of the customer at the right time. Maybe over to you, Theresia. Have you seen other great AI use cases on the sort of the front end or the consumer end beyond chat?
Yeah. So I want to just follow up on some of the things that you said, because I think it's super interesting.
Yeah, sure.
And I know you've done a post recently on like theme-based super apps in the US. And so I want to talk with you, have a dialogue with you about that. And then I'm going to turn to sort of like, what are my thoughts on super apps and why or why not they're, I've obviously, as we all have, seen the emergence of them in Asia quite strongly, but why we haven't seen them here in the US. You talked about the importance of AI to help make the user experience better for them. I guess one of my questions is, do you find that the starting point, so the savings as the theme for super, do you still find that because of both the origin of the company, but then the richness of information that you can determine from people, that starting with the travel use case helps you build up a faster understanding in order to determine what's the next thing you offer them? Is it the savings on gas? Is it doing the surveys? Like, is that still the best like entry point for you for users?
Yeah, that's a good question. One thing I'll say is that there's not, and maybe this will change over time, but there's not many people who download the super.com app because they're like, whoa, I want to save across everything and I want to earn across everything, right? People don't think of it that way. The reason why people come in is usually they come in for a very specific use case, right? So someone may be searching for a hotel deal, they see a great hotel deal, they're like, oh, super.com has this great hotel deal. They click, they come in, we almost like get out of their way, just like let them book their hotel. And then we're like, hey, here's the ecosystem, here's the app, here are all the other things you can do, right? We may have someone else who wants to build a credit score and they're searching around. Maybe they're on Facebook, Instagram, maybe they're on Google, maybe they're on a credit card comparison site, whatever it is, and they're like, whoa, there's this super.com pay card that lets me build my credit score and earn cash back with my everyday spend. So they come in and again kind of like get out of their way, and we're like, here's the pay card, here's what it lets you do, here's how you build your credit score, come in, sign up now. We get them to sign up, we get them to sign up for the pay card, then we get them to download the app, and then we can say, hey, by the way, here's the ecosystem and here are all the things we can do, right? So typically like each one of these verticals has to stand on its own. It has to pretty much have its own user acquisition channel. It has to have its own way to bring customers in. And then once they're in, then you can introduce them to the ecosystem. And yes, if you have more data, then it's helpful, right? So if someone's coming for the pay card, and one of the ways you can sign up for the pay card is, to connect your bank account and give us the ability to just kind of see all your history and your transactions. And that allows us to sort of help you build your credit score. But at the same time, we now have a lot of interesting information about you. So if we see that you're filling up gas, 3 days a week, then that's the time for us to go right at the top of the UI and say, hey, why don't you sign up for additional gas savings through one of our partners, right? So I would say people come in for different reasons, and then like at the right time, we'll kind of introduce them to the ecosystem, or we'll try and cross-sell them into another product once we have enough information about them.
And I think that's the power of the AI, right? Like in the olden days, right? People could come from multiple things, and then you would have to sit there and go through and create your own sort of flows for like, okay, here's what we think. If someone comes in from the pay card, then the next thing we should do is this, that, or the other, versus if they come in through booking a hotel deal, we should then do C, D, and by using the AI, you can actually make it much more customized, not just by where do they come in or what is their initial acquisition channel, but literally like, well, here's what we know about Hussein, so this should be the next offer for Hussein, versus here's what we know about Theresia. So I think that that's kind of the power of it, right?
100%. And once it's tooled correctly and you have enough volume, then it gets, as you know, it gets better and better and smarter over time. And you start to see conversion rates and cross-sell rates that you couldn't even like imagine or think up before, because you wouldn't be able to understand how to cross-sell in that way. So, you obviously there's a lot of work in order to be able to get there. Like the core products have to first work on their own. You have to have all the right data in all the right places, and you have to have the adaptable UI. But that's what AI can allow us to do, which is really, really interesting.
Yeah, that's great.
Okay. I know we've been chatting for quite a bit. Maybe just wanted to get a bit more of your thoughts on if there's other great B2C companies you've seen that have been using AI and ML, especially like on the front end as opposed to some of the back end stuff. And then I do want to switch topics after that.
Yeah, I think that, as I said, I actually think you guys are one of the early leaders from this perspective. We are beginning to see some people using AI in the fintech space in order to do things like helping to create much more customized financial planning for people, right? At a scale where, in the olden days, right? Like if you actually had to have a financial planner, then it only made sense to offer so there was like, I would say sort of the Gen 1 of that was like kind of Wealthfront maybe, right? But it was definitely more software and automated, right? But it wasn't particularly customized to Hussein versus Teresa. It still was like, would get some information and then would kind of bucket you into different groups, and then it would give you, different recommended portfolios based on that. Now we're starting to see things, but they're very early in their adoption, right? But that's an area we're starting to see some consumer facing things. We've actually seen a bit more on the, I would call it, even here, it's like, it's a end user facing, maybe not consumers, but there's been actually quite a bit of work done here in health and digital health. And when I say it's not really consumers, it's really been more helping healthcare providers of different types and sorts use. And I think the reason why there's been a ton of activity here is that is a place where the general purpose platforms, as we talked about, who knows who's going to win. There's a lot of money and a lot of dollars both being invested and at stake. But with health information, that is information that is not, thankfully, not generally available to these general purpose foundational models. And so you can actually create a much smaller LLM, but that it's optimized towards the health data that you have in order to help providers. So we're investors in a company called Kitsugi, where they help providers based on the health data that they have in a specialized model to determine early indicators of certain diseases based on people's voice and how they are speaking and changes in that, right? So it obviously is not given to the consumer, it's given to a healthcare provider, but that's, I'll call it an end user facing example. And there are a few other things where people are doing things like that, right?
Right.
And then I think, as I mentioned, Writer is a company that, they sell to like people at traditional marketing organizations, high-tech marketing organizations, and they have a smaller but specialized LLM for like marketing and marketing brand voice and consistency, which is a really big deal. I'm sure, as you know, for your company, and then you can imagine for like the P&Gs of the world, like for each specific brand that they have. And they use all of the prior copy so it's kind of like a co-pilot, if you will, for a copywriter, right? Or for a marketing content writer. It doesn't get rid of them, but it actually makes them like 3 to 5 times more efficient.
Yep.
So those are some of the early things that we're starting to see. Look, there's a ton of activity going on there that's trying to use LLMs and AI for productivity tools, like help you write emails and, help you be smarter about scheduling. And I think that as a consumer, I'm excited for those things. But as a standalone business, I think that's a place where, because the same companies that actually own the foundational models, in many cases, are also the same ones that own the email interface, right? Microsoft. And I think it will be much more challenging for a startup to break into that. Like their technology needs to be like 10x better or 100x better to displace the fact that like I'm just so used to my Gmail, like
Right. If you're so used to your Gmail, and Gmail can use AI to help you write better emails faster, it'd be hard for a third party company to come in and layer on top of that. That makes sense. Okay, I wanna switch over to a different topic, which is about diversity, but I missed a question I really wanted to ask you. So we were talking about super apps. We talk about, and I think you agree with me on this, that we're not gonna have like a WeChat in North America, but we're gonna have sort of these theme-based super apps. I'd love to get your take on Twitter or X, and what Elon is doing, and do you think they have I mean, he's talked about building a super app. So far, we haven't really seen anything. Do you think this is real? Do you think this is something that they will do? Do you think they're going to do it by acquisition? And where do you think they're going to go into next?
Well, if I follow your, which I do, your logic on theme based. So the question for me is like Twitter/X, like what's their theme? I think it's something about um sort of news and information dissemination, right? So people have said like it's the town square, or you know, if you want to be a little bit more pejorative, it like replaces like the old days of like, PR Newswire, right? Like it's like, okay, you just put out what you want. So what are the other things that naturally go along with that? And I personally am not, maybe you're much more creative. Maybe you can think of what those things are, but I go back to the fundamentals, right? Which is like, you want to start with where you're starting, which is an area of strength and growing engagement with your users as your base before you expand. And from all the numbers that I've seen, that's not, currently where they are, right? This is not growing engagement. It's not growing users. So it's hard to expand if you're not coming from that base of strength. So even if there are many people who are a lot smarter and more creative than I, could come up with like, what's the theme behind Twitter/X? Like, is now the right time to do that? Because
Well,
you're basically trying to hold on to your users right now.
you're trying to hold on to you. Well, the funny thing is, some people will say that the theme is Elon himself, because he's such a polarizing figure that he could go in, launch something, and people are like, I'm an Elon fan, and whatever Elon builds, I'm going to go and use. So, like, if he goes and he launches payments, it's pretty unrelated altogether from social and news and anything else. It's like, logically, why would any customer go and open the X app and then use it to consume news and go and do payments? But there could be some big Elon fans out there, and obviously the payments app portion still needs to work, and ideally it has very easy to use and maybe even better economics and incentives to be able to use it. But that's the only thing I can think of to bring it together. Anyhow, let's sort of switch topics over here and talk about diversity and opportunity. So I know this is a big area for you. You even have a diversity capital fund at Acrew. Would love for you to just talk about that.
Yeah, you bet. So I guess what I would say is it's been a passion of mine for a long time outside of my day job. And what's really exciting to me is like, specifically with the creation of Acrew Diversified Capital Fund, of which Super is one of our investee companies, is exciting for me to see how it's like coming together in like my day job. So my passion is now part of my investing vocation at Acrew. And what's exciting to me about that is that it came together pretty organically, and that it's really being driven by awesome leaders and founders like yourself and throughout our portfolio, where I saw like a real positive, I don't know, felt like a revolution to me, because I'm like, been doing this for 20 plus years, where CEOs and founders start talking to me and my partners, Kinder and Lauren and Michelle and others, about this, because they realized that if they saw how being attracted to a more diverse network of people, whether that's a candidate pool for employees or candidate pool for advisors or board members, that was actually a strategic advantage to their business, right? So if I have a larger top of funnel, so to speak, right? Like that means that I might be able to attract more people. And I think most CEOs would say like finding and retaining amazing talent is like always like the number one thing for any company that's growing. So, and then, thankfully as you know, I'm a data geek. So like, it was great that to see that people kind of like founders sort of being like, hey, this is real. This is important to me. And then, there's been like several McKinsey studies over time where they study over 1,000 companies where they've proven that those companies that have more diverse boards and leadership teams have return on equity that is 25 to 35% better. So it's great to see the data being borne out. Google's done some studies along the same ways. So when this started to happen, and we started to have both our companies and then other CEOs that we just knew, not in our companies, saying like, hey, we are like saying to my partner, Lauren, hey, you're on Chime, you're Divvy, like we would love to find an independent board member. We're kind of getting to that point in our development who is a fintech expert. And it would be great if the person was a woman or, pick it, whatever diversity metric you want to put in there. And we realize that, well, when it's our companies, that's great. When it's not our companies, then it would be great if we had a vehicle where we could invest in those companies at a later stage. We've always had these early stage seed A company funds. So Acrew Diversified Capital was really created in order to help us invest in what we saw as interesting market demand, where our network, which then we formalized and we created what we call our crew of leaders, of which there are over 300 executives. Over 60% are female executives, 44% are underrepresented minorities. Like it's an amazing group of executives. 2/3 of them are either already on a board or ready to take on a new board. And I think one of them even, I'm going to hand it back over to you because I would love to know like what was interesting to you about taking capital from us. I know you had many suitors for the round that we were chosen to join in on, and whether you have found it, like how have you found it to be helpful?
Yeah, no, that's a good question. So, I mean, first of all, obviously, I'm a diverse founder. My co-founder Henry's a diverse founder. So even just like aligning with a fund that focuses on diversity and understands diversity, I think has been great. I do think it's harder for diverse founders to raise money, and I don't know, you may even have some data on that, which I don't have, but I do know that. So that was great on the initial alignment. What attracted us was that it was great to have a firm that was focused on diversity. B, just the people. So I mean, yourself as well as Sukhinder, just phenomenal people and very well connected. And of course, I've now met Vishal and Lauren as well, and they're also great. So just a great, like I like to work with good people. And diversity is a big bonus, and that really helps. And in fact, when we brought Acrew on, one of the early things we did is we asked Acrew to help us with an additional board member, and Acrew was able to help us find Joanne Bradford, which brought sort of our first female board member. And I mean, if you know Joanne Bradford, she's a legend in all the things that she's done. So it's been extremely helpful to have Acrew on, and you're always thinking about diversity, and you can help diversify our board and help us diversify our leadership team. So yeah, that was attractive, and so far it's paid off.
Awesome. Well, we feel the same way. We're super excited to be partnering with you and excited about the direction that you're growing the company.
Awesome. Well, thank you so much, Theresia. Really appreciate your time. And we will put this out for the people, and hopefully it can be helpful so they can learn more about super.com and learn more about Acrew. Thank you
Awesome.
for your
Thanks for
time.
having me, Hussein. Have a good afternoon.
Okay, bye.
Bye.